Good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming from near and far on this day to remember Bob. I'm Paul Sussman, an old friend of Bob's. I'll be talking a little more later. Bob left us way too young. It's unthinkable, it's unfair, it suggests some kind of flaw in the universe. But it's also a miraculous gift that Bob came into our lives at all. And that's what we're here to celebrate today. So we're going to hear from a few people who knew Bob in different ways. I imagine he'll be watching somewhere. He'll probably miss all the good stuff because he'll be fidgeting with his wireless connection or looking down on a few soccer games, checking the timer on that big bread oven in the sky. We're going to begin with Mike Morgan, Bob's brother.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm Bob's older brother by 5 years. Bob was, all about identity. So that, I guess, as Bob might say, who was this R.L. Bob person? That's kind of the question I'm going to try to answer. First, we have to go to the source, or the source code, if you will, which would be his parents, our parents. His dad, Harry, was an excellent mechanical engineer who helped design the Liberty and Victory ships that helped supply our allies during the Allied forces during World War II. After that, he was he designed dairy plants for Carnation. And then eventually he designed the world's one and only Mumunchi factory for our own business, which where Bob actually worked for one summer. He met my mother, Marion, at Cal Ship during the war, and they married on the day the atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, which was perhaps an omen of a troubled relationship. But they did stay together for 50 years, so that was definitely something. My dad was a nuts and bolts kind of guy. He was into the details, and my mother was definitely a big picture gal, as she would have called herself. She was really a political and social activist. She too many issues to count. I remember back in the 60s, she was working for fair housing and against a proposed essentially putting segregation in the California Constitution. And she worked really hard against that. And she helped the homeless, worked on homeless boards, and was into peace big time, and lots of other political issues. I would like to think that Bob melded the skill sets of both my parents. He, as some people remarked, he had a great grasp for the technical nitty-gritty issues, but he also had a vision of the big picture, the way he wanted the world, the way he wanted the internet to be, and he tried to make it so. And so where did Bob come from? He was born in 1954, in a upscale suburb of Los Angeles called Palos Verdes Estates. It was essentially a white enclave. Then, not so much anymore. I would say in the 50s and 60s it was kind of a Pat Boone kind of place. and Bob, you know. He was a Robert Johnson and Howlin' Wolf kind of guy. So it really didn't mix. But I think he got along. Family lore has it that Bob was not supposed to be a boy. He was supposed to be a girl. But my parents quickly recovered and named him Robert Lyman Morgan, the Lyman after an uncle. He was known to my mom as Robert. Really rarely called him Bob. He was Robert to her. He was known as Bob to the rest of the world. And then he just hit on being named R.L. Bob. Not quite sure where that came from. I've heard different suggestions. One, that he just didn't want to just be another Bob Morgan. There are a lot of them out there. I've always had a deep, dark suspicion that he took it from H.R. Bud Haldeman, who, if you'll recall, was one of Nixon's henchmen. I mean, part of I think he went to jail for some Watergate-related crimes. So it wasn't really a compliment to him. Maybe he just liked the way his name flowed. I'm not sure. I may be wrong about that, but just a guess. Bob, when another bit of family lore was that Bob started reading when he was 3. I was 8 at the time, and I can't really say that was the case, but it certainly could have been. Once he started reading, he became a voracious reader, and his recreational reading was science fiction, much like mine. I like to think I influenced a little bit on that. We read Heinlein and Asimov and Bradbury, and we would have serious, in-depth discussions at night, going long into the night, until my father would come in from the other bedroom and yell at us, "Shut up, God damn it! Get to sleep, kids!" And we might shut up for a while. That kind of leads me to address let's say the drowning issue that some of you might have read about or heard about. Well, we were brothers, and brothers fight, and I was 5 years older than him, and so those fights weren't fair by any means. I will admit that, and I regret it. I kind of my fallback defense is anybody who remember the Johnny Cash's A Boy Named Sue? I think Bob turned out pretty good. I really do. If some of that bullying was made him a little tougher, or made him a little more aware of what it was like to be the underdog, well, then so be it. I kind of hope that's the case. Bob was an incredibly bright kid, but he could not be described as an adventurous eater. I think before the age of 14, he subsisted on Cheerios, hamburger patties, no buns, nothing touching those patties, bologna sandwiches, and assorted candy bars. We had a weekly taco night, and Bob's idea of taco was ketchup on ground beef. That was getting kind of far out there. I remember the night, I guess it was probably a Thanksgiving trip back from Harvard, and he said, "Hey, let's go out to a Chinese dinner." And we all just kind of looked at him. "Bob, who are you? And what did you do with the real Bob?" He just suddenly went from being this, terrified of anything exotic to international gourmand. he defied expectations, let's say that. For 13 years, Bob lived in a beautiful, spacious house built to our design in PV Estates. And we lost the house in the middle 60s. We had some tough economic times. Lost the house to a bank. We were always ahead of our time. And while Dad worked to get back on the feet, we depended on the kindness of friends like the Hogans and others. Somehow Bob was able to ignore all the problems and uncertainty. And he got straight A's through high school. Brilliant career. He did, I think he came in second in a physics test, national physics test. He showed his math chops in many tests. Aced the SATs. He even played football in the American funny shaped ball kind. Quickly discovered that he was not set out to be a tackling dummy, so he quit. But years later, he fell in love with the more civilized version the rest of the world calls football, particularly when his girls and his wife played the game. As he said, a brilliant high school career, and then he went off to Harvard. And if you'd asked me in '72 where would Bob be when he graduated, I would have said, oh, he'd be on his way to be a physicist or some other hard science. But Bob had other ideas. He was an English major, and as I understand it, he spent a good deal of time and energy working on theatrical productions, setting up stage sets and learning some heavy-duty carpentry skills. Go to Harvard, learn to pound nails. Go figure. But that was Bob. That was Bob. He also did not have a typical Harvard post-grad career. After the infamous winter spent breaking up rocks in the molybdenum mine in Leadville, Colorado, my guess he was probably one of the few Harvard, graduates on the staff there. Just a guess. He did get to work in a theatrical production of Shakespeare in the LA Greek Theater. I know he enjoyed it, but I think it was at that time when he kind of decided that showbiz was not going to be his thing. Now, as I said, he was born and raised in the extended suburbs, but he really acquired a taste for the nitty-gritty urban life in his Harvard years. And if he wanted to go nitty-gritty urban, he had to move to San Francisco, the city, where he enrolled in SFSU, and joined the IT department. Just fell in love with computers, networks, and made a career out of it using his mad analytic and writing skills, putting them to good use. The rest is history. Stanford, IETF, UW, Internet 2, Mace. Others have described his impact on the internet and the academic world far better than I can. But he was certainly an inspiration to me. Something even more important happened to Bob in San Francisco. He met and married the love of his life, Eve. Had two beautiful, amazing daughters, Annika and Julia. In order to donate the stem cells for his transplant, I spent a couple weeks with Bob and the family in San Francisco. I had the privilege of watching the love and respect they had for Bob. Juliet, a school project I guess it was for a French class or our language arts class, that's right, to make baguettes, and he showed, it was just an amazing thing to watch him transmit that love and knowledge of how to bake bread to Julia, and how she so enjoyed it. Eve told me later that Bob had kind of been inspired by my mother's baking back in the 60s. When she baked bread, she baked the bread to really to save on dollars when dollars were really tight. And we didn't appreciate it at the time. We wanted Wonder Bread. God forbid, we didn't want this homemade bread. It was embarrassing. But, inspired him. And so she kind of passed the torch of bread baking on to her youngest son. And there he was passing that torch on to his youngest daughter. It was really a love in action. Bob was a great brother. Over the year, we had lots of fun. Whitewater rafting, cross-country skiing, his beloved ski kayaking, hiking, cycling, just hanging out, having a few brews. Those were good times, great times. But more important, he was there when I needed him. He gave me some great advice about my own humble IT career. He was there when both our parents died to share the burden of making those horrible life and death decisions. And when I had a really bad bike accident in 2009, he came down, really supported me and Jennifer. So you can only imagine how great it was when I found out I could donate those stem cells for his transplant that was coming. I so hoped it would give him a chance at more years of life. I can remember all those calls, late night calls we had over the years from San Francisco and Washington. I'd hear his warm, raspy, "Oh," and I'd answer, "Hey kid, how's it doing?" And then we'd talk about how Eve and the kids were doing and anything and everything. Great conversations. He will always be my wise, brilliant, loving kid brother. Good night, Bob.
I'm Craig Hogan. I'm, I guess, Bob's oldest friend. It's quite overwhelming to see so many people here today to share memories of Bob, and I guess in the cloud as well, around the world. Bob's friendship has been one of the greatest blessings and largest influences of my life. Since we were little kids, I can't remember a time when Bob wasn't my friend. Went to school all the way through school together, from preschool, kindergarten, 4th grade, 5th grade, high school, finally college together. And when the time came to go to college, we crossed the country together, out to Harvard, went back and forth lots of times. In those days, we also did a lot of road trips just for the heck of it. And that included drives up to the coast of Canada and back, out to deserts and hot springs, into winter wilderness and high mountains. And all those trips, Bob's knack for finding surreal and absurd things everywhere salted our trips with many unexpected adventures. I won't say any more about that. He was also way ahead of the rest of us about eating well after he was 14. In fact, it was pretty much always a theme about spending time with Bob. He knew that somewhere along the line, some really nice food would be involved, whatever you did. At Harvard, I could always drop by on Bob and his Dunster House buddies, where they did all this theater stuff, for a warm companionship and humor. It was a wonderful crowd. At college, Bob was quite famous for being an uncompromising, anti-establishment guy. Somebody who looked an awful lot like him was caricatured in the sort of comic books and campus publications now and then. But everybody really admired him for his integrity. It takes a lot of courage to be an iconoclast at Harvard, you know. His uncompromising authenticity and his utter lack of pretension. Later on, I remember being enchanted by Bob's magical life in San Francisco. And we visited every now and then, and we were welcomed into his circle of fascinating friends. Some of you are here today. It's nice to see you again. And his ever-expanding universe of culinary interests. It was also through Bob in 1985 that we met our first Macintosh computer, which became another lifelong companion. Now, somewhere along the line, Bob became famous among the wizards who invent the internets for figuring out how to authenticate identity. I remember him explaining the historical origin of the word for his system, shibboleth. In the Bible, a tribe called the Gileadites used it as a way to authenticate the identity of people crossing at a checkpoint on the River Jordan. And those who wished to pass were asked to pronounce the word shibboleth, which just means a kind of grain. And if they said thibboleth instead, you have to imagine Bob saying that, shibboleth, thibboleth. That meant they were actually Ephraimites, not Gileadites, because the Ephraimites couldn't say the sh, sh sound properly, and then the Gileadites would cut their heads off. There's 42,000 of them. And it was clear that Bob thought of the Gileadite swords as the middleware of their day. And he pronounced the words in a really funny way, that's why I remember the story. But he never explained to me what his system did to those that failed his shibboleth test. But some of you could explain that to me later, perhaps. Anyway, most of all about Bob, I remember lessons I learned from him. And I'm not talking about the book stuff, although I did learn a lot of book stuff from Bob, because he was always the smartest kid in school, and I guess we went to school together. He always beat me at physics tests and stuff like that. And I mean lessons about how to live right. He constantly showed me, by his own exceptional example, the right way to think about things, to treat people justly and fairly, to live honestly and morally. Bob cultivated compassion as a kind of art form and seemed to spend every waking moment mostly preoccupied with the welfare of other people, his friends, his family, his colleagues, and even total strangers who happened to drop into his life. He set an incredibly high standard, and I'll always try to live up to as long as I live. He was an amazing friend. It's hard to believe he's gone.
I met Bob in college, and we mostly wound up in the same places for 25 years after that, through our wanderings after college and settling in parallel into jobs, marriages, and kids about the same age, until he and his family moved to Seattle 13 years ago. We met when we were 18, and like all 18-year-olds, we were competent, fully formed adults, vast experience of the world, full of wisdom, confidence, and self-knowledge. I first met Bob when we were working together on a theater production, which both Mike and Craig have mentioned, was a production of The Wizard of Oz, which foretold all kinds of things about Bob's life, I think. Who was that man behind the curtain? I was in the pit band and Bob was doing tech, so neither of us were on the stage. Bob was doing the sound and the sets and creating a surreal filmic masterpiece that would convince everyone in the Dunster House dining room that Dorothy's house truly had taken off with all of us inside of it in that tornado. And the sound in the film, it wasn't downloaded and clicked around in iMovie. I know some of you know what I'm talking about. Bob did it the hard way, the old-fashioned way, splicing tape and film by hand late into the night. He paid his pre-digital dues. Bob spent a lot of time in the theater. I don't think I ever saw him actually studying. In fact, you may have heard him brag about his remarkable achievement at Harvard, a record that probably has never been equaled, of earning every possible grade from A+ to D-. Probably mostly clustered towards the latter. For this, we sent you to Harvard. But he was passionate about the theater. And that man of passions, that's the Bob that we know. The theater early on, and then all things Japanese, his bikes, his kayaking, soccer watching, palindromes, his beloved bread, and his even more beloved family. All passions. I mean, you see people who are passionate for the wrong reasons, to impress or to amass, to compete, to be trendy. Bob was passionate for the joy of it, for the immersion in it, and for the search of the essence of things, like his perfect baguette, and always for the chance to share those passions. And I think we've all probably experienced that sharing of Bob's passions. He was so passionate about the theater that it seemed like he might be heading for a career in theater. And fortunately for the world of identity authentication, whatever the hell that is, it was not to be. But as much as Bob did achieve in his career, he was never the kind of person to plan out a career path. He would have been appalled at the thought of it. I remember once, as college was coming to a close, he had to fill out some sort of application, something very important, and thus late, I'm sure. He was stewing over having to state a career goal in the application, and he just was racking his mind to have to commit to something like that. And I think to his own surprise, he finally wrote writer. And in the end, probably wasn't what he had in mind, but after over the last few years, many of us grew to know another side of Bob through his writings on his blog. And it was all there. His delight in explaining extremely technical, small matters, educating people, assessing technical options, and as Craig and Mike have both said, his compassion for everyone that you saw on the blog. No matter how frustrating his medical experiences were, you probably all read these, crazy day after day of being put through hell. Somehow he managed to remain compassionate about his own caregivers, about the hospitals. He would complain, he would make fun of it, but through it you could see If anyone visited him with people in the hospital, you'd see how he connected with those people, always with compassion. His courage, of course, that you could read in there every day, and his gallows humor, his dry gallows humor right up to the end. And always his determination to live life to the fullest, no matter what else was going on. And there was always something in those blogs. They weren't just about the latest medical procedure. They were, while all that was going on, whatever it was he was doing with his family or his friends or his work. Some people have a revelation when they get a glimpse of their own mortality, and it inspires them to live every day. But Bob never needed that kick. I mean, he was born that way somehow, and he shared it with all of us, and that's just inspired me in so many ways, so many times, reminding me, just being with Bob, that just how wonderful life is, how wonderful people are, how much there is out there. And it's something I just will try to live up to as I remember Bob. We were a very healthy influence on each other in college. After just one semester as roommates, we both dropped out. When we did come back with our friend Roger, we rented a fairly seedy apartment in Somerville. There wasn't much studying going on. We had a lot of strange found objects in the apartment, but I don't think a desk was actually one of them. None of us had a girlfriend, and whatever it was we were doing during the day, what I remember most were the marathon cooking sessions that followed. And this was before Bob knew anything about emulsions and yeasts and sourdough starters and the rest. I mean, the first thing Bob proudly cooked, I never forget this, was refried beans with lard. So there was no word for foodie at that time, I think. And that wasn't the point. Cooking was a way to be with people, a way to experiment, a way to enjoy, and most importantly, a way to procrastinate. An average meal took 5 to 6 hours to prepare and eat, which brings us to the unavoidable and little uncomfortable point that Bob was also often characterized as being slow. And this is a scurrilous accusation. He was not slow. Bob cared. And he wasn't always rushing on to the next thing. Whether it was looking for just the right word or the right gift, Bob was an incredibly generous person. And he never gave sometimes you get these gifts and the first thing you think of when you open them is, who am I going to re-gift this to? Bob spent a lot of time thinking about people. It always showed up in gifts, the way he thought about people, the way he would wrap them. So whether it was that or rooting around to find just the right item under a mountain of what ignorant people might refer to as a pile of crap. Sometimes it took Bob a moment to, to spit it out. But other people took even more time to prattle on and on, too many words signifying nothing. Bob could sum up something as complex and layered as his health condition and his prospects with a simple phrase that spoke volumes that Eve reminded me of yesterday. It is what it is. Now, Bob was from LA, as we've heard, and he hung on to certain roots. Some of you may not know that Bob even believed he was part Mexican. I remember going into a new sandwich shop once. Bob scanned the menu and his eyes lit up. He told the kid behind the counter, who only later we realized was actually named the kid, he told the kid to make him the 3 chili special. Extra hot. So the kid yelled back to his boss in glee, "The death wish! The death wish!" So we snuck our sandwiches into a movie theater. We waited for the lights to dim, and then we unpacked them and took the first bites. Before the preview was over, Bob had bolted out of his seat and was stumbling across the row. He came back about a half an hour later, panting and covered in sweat. Yes, Bob had his macho side. And of course, Bob's LA roots were most visible in his sartorial splendor. I see a number of shirts in the audience today in tribute to Bob. I am dressed in his honor this morning, though nobody could fill out a Hawaiian shirt like Bob. I don't aspire to that. I've often wondered who Bob would have been had his parents called him something other than Bob. Anything else. I mean, who invested more in their name than R.L. Bob Morgan? His website had dozens of links to other Bobs. He saved all of his conference name tags. You can see them in the backyard of the house. There's hundreds of them over decades, maybe thousands. At one time, his favorite music group was the Bobs. And this uber normal name of his, it was some sort of gauntlet the world had thrown down, a challenge to surmount the idea of just being normal. Other LA kids might have been listening to the Beach Boys or the Beatles, the Eagles. But Bob preferred Frank Zappa, and beyond that, as I'm sure Mike remembers, to the inscrutable Captain Beefheart. Bob particularly loved Captain Beefheart's album, Trout Mask Replica. 3 words that said so much. But what exactly? Bob's last post began with another 3-word phrase, the extremely bobular nugget, I'm still alive. In the way he touched so many people, in so many ways, indeed he is.
I didn't know Bob as well as some people here. But when I was with Bob, I knew I was with a righteous man. And by this I mean he was a right-thinking, right-speaking, right-action, right-speech kind of a guy. A man who could be seemingly hesitant before he said something, because he was thinking about the right thing to say at that moment in that circumstance. The right thing to say that was to the point and non-harming to others. He was a caring, kind, and mindful kind of friend. Eve has asked me to read a poem that Bob knew, understood, and loved. It is written by a well-known and respected Vietnamese Zen Buddhist master, Thich Nhat Hanh, whose key teaching is that through mindfulness we can learn to live in the present moment instead of in the past and in the future. Dwelling in the present moment is, according to Nhat Hanh, the only way to develop truly peace both in oneself and in the world. The poem is called Please Call Me by My True Names. Don't say that I will depart tomorrow. Even today I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second I am arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird that swoops down to swallow the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I am also the grass snake that silently feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power on my hands, and I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up and the door of my heart could be left open, the door of compassion. In the Southeast Asian Buddhist tradition, today, Sunday, is a day for seeking peace and equanimity. Feelings we can all share and take with us in some small part in this celebration today of Bob's life and interests. So Bob's favorite poem is a meditation on the way we're all connected. So in the spirit of this truth, may we all be well and happy. May we all be free from grief and suffering. And may we all find peace.
I'm Terry Gray, and I'm connected to Bob through the University of Washington. Earlier this morning, one of you said to me, "Terry, I don't think I've ever seen you wearing a Hawaiian shirt or a tie before." And indeed, this shirt was purchased specifically in honor of Bob. And it's been decades since I wore a tie, and I was surprised this morning when I remembered I could still tie one. The shirt's for Bob, the tie's for you, because I want to show respect and love. I wanted to write something to put on my website as a tribute to Bob, and I did that. And I'm going to do something else that I never do besides wearing a tie and a Hawaiian shirt, and that is I'm going to read something. Bob would undoubtedly prefer something more ad hoc and in the spur of the moment. But after writing some thoughts down, I was pretty emotionally drained, and there was nothing left for, in the moment, extemporaneous speaking. So this is what you get. I count myself among the many colleagues and friends around the world who are mourning the loss of R.L. Bob Morgan after his passing on July 12th during cancer treatment at UW Medical Center. He was undergoing a procedure that he knew was high risk, and my heart goes out to anyone who has to make a decision like that. Both professionally and personally, he understood that life's difficult choices are all about risk management. In the past few months, several other colleagues important in my life have passed on, but they were all older than me. Bob left us way too soon, and he left enormous shoes to fill. Those who have worked with Bob know the enormity of his contributions, that he is irreplaceable, and that his expertise just happens to be in the field upon which the future of IT rests. In 1998, I offered Bob a job in my organization at the University of Washington, thus making him, like myself, a California expatriate. I knew that Bob would be a great addition, but I didn't know at the time that hiring him would be one of the best things I ever did for the UW. As part of my due diligence in the hiring process, I did check references. One of them was Ramon Khanna, his boss at Stanford at the time. What I recall from that conversation is Ramon's description of Bob as a very deep thinker. What an understatement. Bob was an expert in the field of identity management, which provides the foundation for safe access to digital resources such as email, online banking, etc. He was internationally recognized for his foundation work in federated identity, a more secure approach to accessing internet services. Somehow the term expert doesn't quite do it. He was much more than that. The online identity area he worked in was remarkably complex, with equal portions of technical, policy, and people challenges. To these challenges, he brought clarity and wisdom, persuading others in industry and academia via steel trap reasoning and quick wit, but mainly by radiating the high goal of doing the right thing for the community. His intellect brought respect. His humanity and humor brought trust and love, which I believe are the cornerstones of civilization. In addition to his contributions to UW's central IT organization, Bob was an active member of the Internet Engineering Task Force, the group which sets technology standards for the Internet, and Internet 2, the organization which operates the nation's premier research and education network. Just recently, Bob was awarded the Internet 2 President's Leadership Award with this inscription: for exceptional global leadership in the evolving world of digital identity, for keen vision and acuity in enabling new paradigms and services of enduring benefit to global research, education, and beyond, for mentorship and personifying the essence of true collaboration and membership in Internet 2 and in common. In addition to being a world-renowned technologist, Bob loved sea kayaking, photography, soccer, and bread making. His work required extensive travel, and he never missed an opportunity to bring home gourmet flour from European bakeries to improve his own baguettes. Unfortunately, my office was on a different floor than Bob's, so I rarely got to partake in the samples he would bring in. Though from a waistline management perspective, that was probably just as well. Bob was on a mission to make the world a better place by sharing his expertise and his bread. It was a consuming mission, and he was a scarce resource. No doubt his family paid the biggest price for this scarcity, and their only solace may be in realizing the magnitude of his contribution to the greater good. Everyone wanted more of his time. Everyone had one last burning question to ask him. Now we must find our own way, but not without the guidance provided through his enduring legacy. As others have said, Bob is proof that one person can make a huge difference. I would say that he is living proof of that. A gentle soul who lives on in this sphere, not only through his work, but everyone he touched, family, friends, colleagues. It has been my honor to know him and be touched by him. I hope Eve and his daughters, Annika and Julia, know just how much respect and love those he touched have for Bob. He is, and always will be, special.
2 quick stories and 1 short poem, all around a common theme of refusal. March 1999, I crossed over from being a CIO at Colorado to leading the Internet 2 middleware stuff. And in April of 1999, I gathered the best and the brightest that I could find in our community in a conference room in Ann Arbor. And Bob was certainly there. And we talked all day about what good work we could do. There was a lot of stuff that we saw out there. And then at the end of the day, I stood up and asked to go around the room and seek interested parties to move it forward. And one by one, people said, "I've been told to volunteer for nothing." And so we went around the room, and there wasn't a single volunteer. The last person was Bob. He said, "I've been told to volunteer for nothing, but I refuse. There's something here." That changed everything. The meeting went on the next day. We were all aglow. We had vision. We had ideas. We had leadership. Fast forward, February 2000, a Common Solutions group meeting in Tucson. I'm sure some of you out there on the internet were in that room. We're sitting around trying to think, what's the most daunting and important task we could do? And we agreed it was inter-realm authentication and authorization. We were all victims of PKI. We all had been down the Kerberos route. We knew it was really hard. And so we didn't think it was possible. And Bob just coaxed from each of us little pieces of ideas about how we could put it together, refusing to take no. About 5 months later, I'm emailing Bob, and I think of a name for the project. And I write it down in an email message, and then I go, "Oh, that's too ethnic." And I just tuck the message away, maybe to send the next day. I wake up the next morning, there's a note from Bob, sent that same night, going, "I think I have a name for the project, Shibboleth." And it was one of the special bonding moments we had to find that word together. So, there's a poem I shared with Bob that I'd like to read. It's short. It's by Archibald MacLeish. It's entitled, "What Any Lover Learns." Water is heavy silver over stone. Water is heavy silver over stone's refusal. It does not fall. It fills, it flows, every crevice, every fault of the stone, every hollow. River does not run. River presses its heavy silver self down into stone, and stone refuses. What runs, swirling and leaping into sun, is stone's refusal of the river, not the river. I want to thank all of you for joining with Bob in his ever so gentle and ever so wise refusals. We have all swirled and leapt into sun because of that.
Push the
This is a song that Bob used to sing to the girls every night when he put them to bed. It's very simple. And we'd like you to sing along.
Okay.
Tell me why the
Stars do shine. Tell me why the ivy twine. Tell me why the sky's so blue.
and I will tell you just why
I love you.
because God made
The stars to shine, because God made the ivy twine, because God made the sky so blue, because God made you, that's why I love you.
And just...
So, suppose I'm here to talk to you all about Dad Bob. Everyone here knew Bob in a different way. Tech Bob, College Bob, Friend Bob, Uncle Bob, Husband Bob. But only my sister Annika and I got to know him as Dad Bob, and he was an amazing dad. He was extremely proud of it too. He loved to flaunt our soccer playing, and Annika's brief stint as a figure skater, my brief time as a jazz musician. But one of the things he was certainly most proud of about being a dad was the title of the original hipster. A title my sister first gave him after listening to all his odd stories. A title he later found out had, of course, a blog revolving around the idea that dads are in fact the original hipsters. As many of you may know, this last November we got a new puppy, Oliver. It was pretty difficult to come to a consensus between the four of us on what to name him. My soccer-loving parents, of course, were attempting to persuade us to name him after a famous soccer star, such as Ozzie Alonso, a player on the Seattle Sounders, or Ziggy Schmidt, the coach. But once they started considering names such as Nkufo, Zakawani, and Kaká, Annika and I had to draw the line. And that's when my dad turned to his love of language and the dog's Dutch origin as a source of inspiration. So he found several words in Dutch he thought embodied the Klankerhonder spirit. Blidge and Gelokig, both meaning happy, voter, meaning food, splidges, meat, and gelieft, beloved. As you can imagine, the names didn't go over too well with the rest of us, as Bob was the only person who thought Blidge, or Bly, as he often reminded me was the proper pronunciation, was an appropriate name for a puppy. Eventually, we settled on Oliver, though my dad insisted on calling him Olafur for the first week we had him. One of the quintessential aspects of Dad Bob was his love for great literature, and by that I mean Harry Potter. He read me all 7 books, complete with accents, probably until I was a bit too old, but that didn't change a thing. I've picked out a couple of passages regarding Dumbledore, who, for those of you who aren't familiar, is Harry's mentor throughout the series. This one's in the first book on page 123. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms open wide, as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to a new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. Thank you." He sat back down. Everybody clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. "Is he a bit mad?" he asked Percy uncertainly. "Mad," said Percy airily. "He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. He is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry? The second is in the 6th book on page 595. The door to the ramparts burst open once more, and there stood Snape, his wand clutched in his hand as his black eyes swept the scene. From Dumbledore slumped against the wall to the 4 Death Eaters, including the enraged werewolf and Malfoy. "We've got a problem, Snape," said the lumpy Amicus, whose eyes and wand were fixed alike upon Dumbledore. "The boy doesn't seem able." Though somebody else had spoken Snape's name, quite softly. "Severus." The sound frightened Harry beyond anything he had experienced all evening. For the first time, Dumbledore was pleading. Snape said nothing, but walked forward and pushed Malfoy roughly out of the way. The 3 Death Eaters fell back without a word. Even the werewolf seemed cowed. Snape gazed for a moment at Dumbledore, and there was revulsion and hatred etched in the harsh lines of his face. "Severus, please." Snape raised his wand and pointed it directly at Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra. A jet of green light shot from the end of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore squarely in the chest. Harry's scream of horror never left him, silent and unmoving. He was forced to watch as Dumbledore was blasted into the air. For a split second, he seemed to hang, suspended beneath the shining skull, and then he fell slowly backward, like a great rag doll, over the battlements and out of sight. Harry felt as though he too were hurtling through space. It had not happened. It could not have happened. Thanks.
It's hard writing a speech about my father. We've all read his blog, appreciated his wit and way with words. There's so much literary pressure to live up to. Right now, we all seem to lack the words to adequately express what he meant to us, but we really love him. It's the reason why this room is filled right now, why he has over 100 comments on his professional tribute website. And then he has his own hashtag on Twitter, which he would have been absolutely overjoyed about. It's why we can't truly convince ourselves that he's gone. We all loved that sly smile he would flash just before he was going to inform you about a subject he knew far more about than you did. We appreciated his unconventional way of dressing himself, from the outrageous shirt rack at Buffalo Exchange. We loved how he would carefully examine each piece of bread he made, checking that the whole structure was up to his exceedingly high standards. He was the father who gave a dictionary as a Christmas gift, who captured every sports game, family event, and awkward phase on camera and proudly displayed them for everyone to see. We'll miss the one who made us late for every important occasion and hovered incessantly over our shoulders every time we cooked in his kitchen. We'll miss the man who prefers the corner slice of lasagna, who will drive several blocks around just to avoid waiting at the 65th Street stoplight. The father who 1 year after treatment insisted on going skiing with us and bravely inner tubing at Lake Chelan. We're all scared to death. Our house will be uncomfortably quiet during each soccer game without his loud yelps of excitement and criticism. My mom will miss the latte he made for her each morning. Julia will miss Saturday mornings at the farmer's market with him, finding the most obscure vegetables to cook with. And I'll miss having my father to fully support every overly ambitious and slightly outrageous dream I have for myself. And even though he has now migrated to the cloud, throwing tennis balls on a heavenly beach with Callie, we still can't help but feel utterly lost down here on earth without him.
Well, I guess I'm Mike, Bob's nephew. I guess mostly what I think about when I think of Bob is every time I had some sort of new thing I was into, maybe brewing beer or playing the piano accordion. He always had something to give me or to talk to me about. I remember when I started playing the piano accordion, he gave me this 3-disc set of accordion music of polka from around the world. And it's like, why do you have this? And his brewing pot from years ago when he was brewing beer, that was like, where do you have all these things? And cleaning out his house, it's like, where did all these things come from? But he's had so many interests in, just like even his baking of bread, like, you ask Bob, like, how do you bake a loaf or a baguette? And it's not an easy question for him to answer. And that's why he stutters so much, is because he knows so much about it. Like, he doesn't just get into something, he like knows everything about it. And that was always really inspiring to me. But I think mostly also what I remember since he was diagnosed with lymphoma is just every family gathering we had, he was so positive and just such a light to be around, knowing how much pain and how much he's had to go through. Excuse me. And just that nothing could stop Bob from being who he was and doing things that he loved and just being who he was. And that was just such an inspiration to me. Is I guess. So I'm just gonna miss him a lot, and he's a great guy, and I guess that's all I have to say.
We have a slideshow coming up. I think we located about 60,000 pictures of Bob, almost all of which he had taken of himself. But Annika, assisted by Julia, did a great job of putting this together. And lest the occasion be too somber, we did find some true Bob music to attach to the slideshow that we hope you'll enjoy.
Shinjuku はそさわに新橋からガランダがすい屋台の茶のメロソ old-fashioned eating is a dish you can't beat when you try it from the kitchen where there is a sober man. When it's sober schlepping time in Shimbashi, and those hungry trucking drivers hit the town. When the drivers start braking cause their stomachs are aching, just to get some of that good old soda down. Yes, sir.
Because you're mine. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. Yeah, I can't stand. Woo! No running around. I can't stand. No putting me down. I put a spell on you. Because you're mine. Oh, yeah. Whoa. Stop the things you do. What's up? I ain't lying. I love you. I love you. I love you anyhow. I don't care if you don't want me. I'm yours right now. I put a spell on you. Because you're mine, mine, mine. You're mine.
We have a chance for anybody who'd like to come up to the mic and say anything you remember about Bob or would like to say. So come on up and let us hear.
Hi. Let's see if I can do this. My name's Jeff Hodges. I may have to have someone read this. I'll try, and then maybe Eve can do it if I can't do it. Anyway, I went to Stanford from industry in 1989, and knew Bob basically from then. So this is a little long. I'm going to try to plow through it but identity is a story, and we've all been relating stories about Bob here and on his tribute page, and building a richer shared picture. And I have a few vignettes from over the years that I'd like to share. And an overall term is a really normal one, which is Bob had style, as we all have seen today. But anyway, here goes. So, back in 1990s, when we were there at Stanford's networking system, Bob transferred onto my team, and I hadn't interacted with him much when he was doing the consulting gig. And he was out in the field a lot on campus trying to keep those damned AppleTalk routers running. And apparently my teams, not having anything to do with AppleTalk, was a key impetus for his desire to learn about network management in SNMP. Running AppleTalk networks must really have sucked. We got to know each other, and after a year or so, I and my then 4-year-old oldest son, along with an array of people, several of which are here, I believe, helped Bob and Eve move into their house. And Bob was there for me. So all that junk he had, I helped move it, and he had a lot of junk. And then he helped me move into my own house later, not that long later, I don't remember exactly, a year or so. And he was very gracious and only gave me modest grief about the amount of junk I had, and all the old car parts we had to figure out how to jam into that truck. A while later, I recall Bob proudly displaying Annika nestled in his arm, as we saw here, at a Pine Hall picnic while sporting a grin about 2 miles wide. He was so jazzed about fatherhood. At work, Bob kept chipping away at our on-the-cheap network management project, regardless of how ultimately fruitless it kept looking. Meanwhile, he provided Perl tutorial help to needy coworkers after teaching it to himself. He wrote some data processing backend that did, I don't remember exactly what, but it was pretty impressive. And I used it as an example of how to do it right, Perl programming, for years. Not bad for a former cab driver with an English Lit degree. In there at some point, Bob figured out he ought to know a little bit about something called crypto. So he just went out and bought the Handbook of Applied Cryptography, which is about that thick, and started wading through it. This is not something for the faint at heart. He became our go-to guy on how that stuff works, and years later he also read Karl Popper's The Open Society, as has been mentioned, saying it was probably the best book he's ever read. Eclectic taste is the term that comes to mind, and deep thinking. Later, Bob gamely took over management of the systems and technology team from me and found out what a pleasure it is to manage a similarly administratively challenged coworker. He sometimes joked that I suckered him into the switch on purpose. Bob invariably wrote eloquently crafted, incisive email messages on any number of aspects of our multifaceted and complex work realms, and also about the world in general, in finite time, no less. His writing has served as an example for many over the years. Then there was the time he generously forgave me for cracking some part of his brand new folding bike when I attempted to do a wheelie on it. That is, he didn't simply go and break my stupid neck. But he didn't actually tell me for years that I'd cracked it, though he never did suggest I try out one of his bikes again. Bob was the life of the party. I recall him at a Pine Hall Christmas party in a corner with Brian Waugh, another deep-voiced guy, singing Christmas pop songs in great harmony, drawing a nice crowd. What? And he can sing too? At another party, he was emceeing the piñata melee with a laugh-o-meter of his design in his hand. And there was Bob's going away party from Stanford, where he was roasted by John Clem, and his various Bobisms were highlighted, and John had Bob demonstrate them for all. There's actually pictures that, with Terry Gray's help, I found from that. They were on the Internet Wayback Machine, and they're on the tribute webpage now. There's a link to it. Bob had a penchant for taking whatever was his current folding bike apparently nearly everywhere, including to IETF meetings, though he did learn the hard way not to negotiate speed bumps one-handed while carrying a latte in the other. Thank goodness that bike had come with a really nice travel suitcase, because I flew home with it for him since he had to depart the meeting early on crutches. He was quite worried that this mishap was going to foul up his new job at UW, but they apparently decided he didn't hurt the non-bike riding parts of his brain that they were after, and they kept him on anyway. Shortly after Bob went to UW, I left Stanford to return to industry. We were both working in the so-called identity space, and so we had the opportunity to rub shoulders, as he would say, at various meetings most every year right up through this last spring, thank goodness. We had a wonderful time in Paris. Bob became ever more of a foodie, and so while attending those meetings, we of his entourage didn't have to worry about figuring out where we were going to have lunches or dinners. I have never really determined how he managed to stay engaged in such gnarly technical discussions, interjecting his trenchant observations at just the right time, while also nosing through Zagat and other sources, plotting our later gastronomic adventures. Then there was his tale of convincing an elderly French bakery proprietor in Paris, a grandmotherly type, to sell him 5 kilos of raw baguette flour, which this story had us in stitches whenever he told it. Ever since Bob became ill, I always had a worry for him in the back of my mind. Bob had never been one for hugging coworkers, especially male ones, in my observations over the prior years, but when I spontaneously gave him one at IETF a few years ago, he went with the flow and he returned it, and I'm so forever glad. However, I never got a kiss from him, as Mr. Geddes apparently did. As Bob would perhaps said, that must have been truly gnarly. Bob was full of surprises, humor, sense, intelligence, and goodwill. He was a mentor, teacher, and quietly effective leader for so many, as well as a devoted husband and father. I'll be forever honored to have been a colleague and friend of his.
What was that, Grandma? Oh. My name is Molly. I'm Bob's oldest niece, and I guess I've known Bob my whole life. As a child, I was not welcoming to him, I don't think, at first. I really loved my Aunt Eve, and I was troubled by Bob's presence at his wedding. My brother and sister and I had invented this game with Eve that we called Dogs, where we all pretended we were dogs and Eve took care of us. And I have this memory in my head of being in this room in my parents' house and Bob entering the room and us saying, "You're the dog catcher." Eve was the good person and Bob was this terrible man who captured innocent puppies and put them in cages. And, you know, it's not like I really disliked him. I think I just had a hard time adjusting to him being around. And then as a teenager, I know we've all said a lot of good things about Bob, but as a teenage girl, he just was kind of like, I thought thought he was weird. Like, he dressed weird. I didn't talk to him much, personally. You know, he was there. But then it's just been, you know, in college, when you get all open-minded, Bob's like the best person to talk to because he knows about everything. He is so interesting. He has so many interests, and he just really uses that to connect with people, like many of you have already said, and that was just really a gift to my brother and I, and my sister too. But just to have, you know, an obscure interest like playing the piano accordion, and Bob be so excited about that for you. It was just fun to connect with him on those things. I don't know how this came up, but once I think that Mike and Bob were talking about gypsies, like real gypsies, and Bob suggested this documentary we had to watch. It was this, like, I think we all fell asleep, but we found it like at the library at Western or something, but it was just this like 3-hour, you know, documentary, no words, just the history of the gypsy people. It's like, have you watched this? Like, when do you have time to watch these things? Nobody, does anybody know when he had time? Because I don't. He must have never slept. But just sort of, yeah, over the years, it was just really fun to connect with Bob. I remember I started making my own bread in college, and immediately I had bowls and yeast and this beautiful book on his favorite bread maker, emails asking me how my bread making was going. He really took the time to connect with all of us, and he just was really enthusiastic about his interest in family, and I just loved that so much about him. And we all just always looked forward to family events to see Bob and to eat his food, to hear his jokes. He just was such a fun person to be around. I have another funny moment now, I'm remembering it. So freshman year of college, living in the dorms, my whole family came for my birthday, and everyone went into my dorm room, so like 15 people or something, and Bob like has a video camera and is like filming my roommate, filming the hall. I was so embarrassed. Like, much less having like 12 people crowded in my dorm room, Bob, who's like a foot taller than any other Pereira, scanning the room with, like, maybe it was a new video camera, I don't know. But I'm really just gonna miss the dynamic he brings. He just was sort of this cultural ambassador, bringing interesting conversation and food, information. It's gonna feel kind of boring without him around, I think. So I guess we'll all miss him. That's all I have to say.
Hi, my name is John Pereira, and I'm Eve's brother. My kids, Molly and Mike and Megan, they were right in how they terrorized Bob. And I think it's attests to how much he loves my sister. For him to marry into this family, it was knowing what he had to go through. When he would come, we would come to that house, and my wife and I would be downstairs, and you could just hear upstairs this total chaos. And just, you know, Bob's kind of commitment to continue to come around and invest time. I have a lot of great memories of Bob. Some of the conversations we had over visiting, I remember some of my favorite memories are, well, the first time we had a Christmas Eve together. Bob comes in with his family, and you know he's wearing a red Santa hat, and I never thought people actually bought those things at the store, let alone wore them. But that was Bob. And I remember sitting around at a family reunion in New Mexico, and we're just sitting around a restaurant and just chatting, and one of the kids asked Bob a question, which we like to do because, like everybody said, he's full of information. And Bob starts out like we heard, and for some reason at that moment, I think it was Molly pointed out, Bob, the first 3 words out of your mouth every time are, like Bob does, and it's just a great family moment to be together and laugh, and we just had a great time hearing. Bob didn't talk a lot about everything he was doing, but we kind of knew he was going around to these conferences and doing stuff with the internet, and most of us just know how to search for stuff on the internet, so it was always interesting to hear Bob kind of describe a little bit about what he did. But most of all, it was just fun being with Bob and hearing his sense of humor, his interest in our family, and his willingness to participate in the things that we were doing and take interest in my kids, and in the kinds of things that they are interested in, and not focus on his career and what he was doing and all about his stuff. So those are a lot of the things that I appreciate about Bob, and how we'll miss him. And just over the last few years, I'm just so impressed with my sister and how she's been able to really be a caregiver to him. And she's just been great that way. We're all going to miss Bob. Thank you.
My name's Tony Collins, and I'm proud to say that I've known Bob for maybe 50 plus years. He and I'm not prepared with a written, speaking from my heart. Maybe it's because I haven't really reconciled that he's gone yet. And we met in 1957, and Halloween night, 1957, I was 2 and he was 3. He had just turned 3 like 2 days before. And one of us was a skeleton, one of us was a devil. And I'm not sure, probably based on where I led him and stuff in the future, I was probably the devil. But anyway, within a couple of seconds we were wrestling on the ground, and according to my dad, and became friends. I'd like to think deep, meaningful friendship for a long time. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to share a couple of my feelings and some experiences, and nothing well crafted or anything, but some things. I saw a timeline of Bob's life, and I noticed so many things missing from the timeline. And the fact that this room's full speaks to the largeness of this wonderful person we all knew, Bob. And I don't know, I remember back, in the 50s, in the early 60s, his mother was such a wonderful person, like your mom. And she had such a profound effect on Bob, an influence on Bob. She was such a warm, caring person concerned with egalitarian. First person I've ever known in my life that was so concerned with egalitarianism and social justice and these kind of things. When I was a little kid, it was palpable, her passion for the human condition. And that really, Bob, yeah. He I remember, finding beautiful music at the Morgan House back when I was a little kid. We'd listen to Peter and the Wolf, and it was probably on 78s or something like that. It was just, the rest of my life that was important, and I'm sure Bob's, sort of interesting tastes and everything sort of emerged from this great home life in terms of his mother's vision for what makes a real person. We listened to Burl Ives songs, went to the Hollywood Bowl. We were little kids, afternoon concerts on Saturday, and it was just amazing to grow up with Bob. And I was thinking as everybody's talking, and I've heard so much truth, so much real stuff about Bob. And all of it's right. But I was thinking, I don't remember if I ever saw him angry. I was just thinking about that. I certainly did enough to make him angry, and I don't think I ever saw him angry. And he was always able to. I didn't know that. I guess I didn't know that till now. I remember a really rational, caring person. I mean, other things that are missing on that timeline would be, he played the clarinet. I remember when he started playing the clarinet as a little boy, and gave that a shot, and his musical interests and all this over the years. He and I did some interesting things. We got in my 1970 VW van camper, pop top, and took some really good audio recording gear, and drove out to the Ozark Mountains of Missouri and roamed around for a month, Bob and me, van, equipment, in this van for a month, recording old-time fiddle players. And he's got these beautiful recordings. Of course, I'm not organized to do that, but he's got this stuff probably someplace in all of his belongings. Beautiful recordings of these old-time musicians, and we went searching and found all these old-time musicians and all this great stuff, and that's so many memories for me with that. And all these things I'm thinking about were things that he and I did together. What was amazing was his curiosity and his humor, and his eclectic tastes. We shared. I loved as far as we could go, we'd do it, and everything. Food, music, anything. He was so curious about things. We also took lots of trips down to Mexico in my van. And be listening to a Beethoven string quartet, and he was able to, just great conversations. It's like everybody said, he was knowledgeable and well-read and all this. But what was amazing about it is his ability, like in a systems way, to connect things. He's like the ultimate quantum thinker or something, where you talk to him about poverty, and he'd connect things in a beautiful way. I'll miss that so much. That's the one really great gift that Bob brought to our friendship, I thought, is his ability he's a guy I could talk to and really depend that he was telling me the truth. He was really telling me the truth, and he could see into something and see something that I, couldn't see, or that common folks just didn't see. He could connect things on a deep level. And I'm not reconciled with the fact that he's gone yet. I see his picture, and he's still here. I guess with Julia and Annika, I'd just like to say your father was so important to so many different people, and he was so caring. We all know that, but it wasn't something that it's something that's been there for a very long time. And anyway, I love Bob so much, and peace be upon him. And thank you.
I know there might be other people who want to talk, but I think we're coming to the end of our remembrances today. Again, thanks to everybody for coming and being a part of Bob's life and carrying Bob out into the world with us forever.